The summer of 1977 in New York City was not merely a season, it was a pressure cooker. The city was already buckling under the weight of a crippling financial crisis, a brutal heat wave that seemed to melt the asphalt, and a pervasive sense of urban decay. Then, in July, a blackout plunged the 5 boroughs into darkness, leading to widespread looting and unrest. But beneath the headline-grabbing chaos of the blackout and the politics, a colder, sharper fear had gripped the residents of the Bronx and Queens for over a year. It was a fear that kept young couples from sitting in parked cars, a fear that emptied the streets after sundown, and a fear that turned every shadow into a potential threat. This terror had a name, or rather, a moniker adopted by the press and the perpetrator himself: the Son of Sam. For 12 agonizing months, a phantom gunman stalked the residential neighborhoods of New York, targeting unsuspecting victims with a .44 caliber bulldog revolver. The manhunt that ensued was the largest in the history of the New York Police Department. A desperate race against time, involving thousands of officers, conflicting witness reports, and a city on the verge of a nervous breakdown. To understand the magnitude of this investigation, we must look past the sensationalism that dominated the tabloids of the era. We must examine the forensic realities, the procedural grind of detective work in a pre-digital age, and the psychological profile of a man who held a city hostage not through genius, but through random, senseless violence. This is the story of the Omega Task Force, the tragic loss of innocent lives, and the singular, mundane piece of evidence, a parking ticket that finally brought the reign of the .44 caliber killer to an end. The nightmare began quietly, almost unnoticed amidst the high crime rates of 1976. In the early morning hours of July 29th, in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx, 2 young women, Donna Loria and Jody Valenti, were sitting in a parked car discussing their evening. They had just returned from a disco, a common pastime for the youth of the era. As they sat talking, a man approached the vehicle. Without a word, he produced a revolver from a paper bag and opened fire. Donna Loria was struck instantly and succumbed to her injuries before help could arrive. Jody Valenti, though wounded, survived the attack. In the immediate aftermath, detectives were baffled. There was no robbery, no argument, and no apparent motive. It appeared to be a random act of violence, tragic but isolated. At the scene, ballistics experts recovered the bullets. They were .44 caliber, fired from a weapon with 5 lands and grooves and a right-hand twist. This specific ballistic fingerprint pointed to a Charter Arms Bulldog revolver, a powerful weapon but one that was relatively rare compared to the smaller caliber handguns typically seen in street crimes. At the time, the police had no reason to believe this was the start of a series. But the silence would not last long. In October of 1976, in Queens, a young couple was sitting in their car when they were fired upon. Both survived, though they sustained significant injuries. The description of the attacker was vague: a man in a coat, moving quickly in the dark. Once again, ballistics confirmed the presence of a .44 caliber weapon. By November, the pattern solidified. 2 high school students were attacked while talking on a porch in Queens. Both were shot, leaving one paralyzed. The ballistics matched. The police now realized they were dealing with a serial offender, someone moving between boroughs, targeting young people, specifically women with long dark hair, and couples. The randomness of the locations and the lack of connection between the victims made traditional investigative methods nearly impossible. There were no motives to trace, no jealous ex-lovers, no business disputes. There was only the gun and the opportunity. As 1976 turned into 1977, the attacks continued. The NYPD formed a dedicated task force, eventually known as the Omega Task Force, to centralize the investigation. It was a logistical behemoth. In an era before computerized databases, detectives relied on index cards, teletype machines, and sheer manpower. They processed thousands of tips, interviewed hundreds of suspects, and patrolled the streets in unmarked cars. hoping to catch the gunman in the act. The psychological toll on the city was immense. The killer began to communicate with the police and the press, leaving a letter near the scene of a shooting in April 1977. The letter was rambling, incoherent, and filled with strange references to wicked King Wicker and a father Sam. It was here that the name Son of Sam was born. The letter revealed a disorganized, delusional mind, yet the handwriting was controlled and printed. Document examiners pored over the text, looking for linguistic clues. They analyzed the phrasing, the indentations on the paper, and the type of pen used. It was a glimpse into the psyche of the offender, but it offered few physical leads. The media coverage exploded. Columnist Jimmy Breslin received a personal letter from the killer, taunting the police and promising more violence. The publication of these letters, while controversial, was a strategic move by the police, hoping that someone might recognize the handwriting or the strange cadence of the suspect's speech. The city went into lockdown. Women cut their hair short or dyed it blonde, desperate to avoid fitting the victim profile. The NYPD was under immense pressure from the mayor and the public. Every day, the killer remained at large was a political disaster and a public safety emergency. Forensic science in the 1970s was advancing, but it lacked the DNA profiling tools we take for granted today. The investigation relied heavily on ballistics and composite sketches. However, the sketches proved to be a source of frustration. Witnesses gave varying descriptions. Some saw a tall man, others a man of medium height. Some described blonde hair, others dark. The face of the son of Sam changed with every incident, leading to a confusion that the killer inadvertently exploited. We now know that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially under high-stress conditions like a shooting. But at the time, the conflicting sketches led detectives down numerous dead ends. The breakthrough, when it finally came, did not result from a dramatic shootout or a brilliant psychological profile. It came from routine, diligent police work and a simple traffic violation. On the night of July 31, 1977, the killer struck for the final time in Brooklyn. Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante were shot while parked near a park. Tragically, Stacy Moskowitz later died from her injuries, and Robert Violante lost his vision. It was a devastating blow to the task force, who had hoped the intensified patrols would prevent further loss of life. However, a witness had seen something. A local resident, Cecilia Davis, was walking her dog near the scene shortly before the shooting. She noticed a car parked near a fire hydrant. As she passed, she saw a police officer placing a parking ticket on the windshield. Moments later, she encountered a man walking toward the car. He looked at her with a strange intensity, making her feel uneasy. She hurried home, and shortly after, she heard the gunshots. For days, Cecilia Davis was too terrified to come forward. But eventually, her conscience outweighed her fear, and she contacted the police. She told them about the car and, crucially, the parking ticket. This was the lead the Omega Task Force had been waiting for. If a ticket had been issued at that specific time and location, there would be a record of it. But finding that record was not a matter of typing a query into a search engine. It required detectives to physically search through stacks of duplicate summonses filed by the Traffic Division. Detectives sifted through the paperwork until they found it. A ticket issued to a yellow 1970 Ford Galaxy. The violation: parking too close to a hydrant. The time matches the witness account. The car was registered to a man named David Berkowitz, residing at 35 Pine Street in Yonkers, just north of New York City. The name David Berkowitz was not in the primary suspect file. He was a postal worker, a former U.S. Army veteran, a man who existed on the margins of society. Detectives did not storm his house immediately. They needed to verify the lead. They traveled to Yonkers and located the yellow Ford Galaxy parked on the street outside his apartment building. Looking through the window of the car, they saw a duffel bag. Visible inside the bag was the stock of a rifle and, more damningly, a letter in an envelope addressed to the captain of the Omega Task Force. It was a moment of electric realization. The car belonged to the man they had been hunting for a year. The detectives decided to wait. They needed to apprehend the suspect safely and ensure he was armed so they could link him definitively to the weapon. On August 10, 1977, David Berkowitz emerged from his apartment building. He walked to the yellow Ford Galaxy. As he settled into the driver's seat, detectives moved in, guns drawn. Berkowitz did not fight. He did not try to run. He turned to the officers with a strange, almost relieved smile, and said, "You got me. What took you so long?" In his car, they found a paper bag containing the Charter Arms Bulldog .44 caliber revolver. Ballistics tests would later confirm it was the same gun used in all the shootings. A search of his apartment revealed a chaotic scene, satanic graffiti on the walls, diaries detailing his arson activities, and drafts of the letters sent to the press. The interrogation of David Berkowitz provided a window into the mind of a disorganized serial killer. He spoke softly, politely, and without apparent remorse. He claimed that he was commanded to kill by a demon that possessed his neighbor's dog, a black Labrador named Harvey. The neighbor's name was Sam Carr, hence the moniker Son of Sam. This demon dog defense became a focal point of the media frenzy. Psychologists and psychiatrists were brought in to evaluate Berkowitz. The legal question was not whether he committed the crimes the physical evidence was overwhelming, but whether he was competent to stand trial. Was he legally insane, unable to distinguish right from wrong? Or was he a man attempting to construct a convenient narrative to excuse his atrocities? The psychiatrists determined that while Berkowitz was severely disturbed, he was fit to stand trial. He understood the charges against him and was capable of assisting in his own defense. The demon story, while indicative of his pathology, did not absolve him of legal responsibility. Later, Berkowitz himself would admit that the story of the dog was a fabrication, a way to articulate his violent urges rather than a literal hallucination. Facing the prospect of a trial that would force the victims' families to relive the trauma, and likely resulting in a guilty verdict regardless, David Berkowitz chose to plead guilty. On May 8, 1978, in a courtroom packed with reporters and grieving families, he formally admitted to the shootings. The judge sentenced him to 6 consecutive life sentences, totaling over 300 years in prison, the maximum penalty allowed at the time, as New York had effectively suspended the death penalty during that period. The capture of the Son of Sam brought a collective sigh of relief to New York City. But the scars remained. 6 people were dead, 7 were wounded, and an entire city had been terrorized. The case also left a lasting mark on the legal system. Following the intense media bidding wars for Berkowitz's story, the New York legislature passed the Son of Sam law. This statute was designed to prevent criminals from profiting from the publicity of their crimes. While the original law was later challenged on First Amendment grounds and revised, the principle remains a key part of victim advocacy today. That justice includes denying the perpetrator the glory and financial gain of their actions. The investigation into the Son of Sam serves as a bridge between 2 eras of policing. It highlighted the limitations of manual record-keeping and the desperate need for interagency communication. The difficulties in tracking a mobile offender across borough lines accelerated the modernization of the NYPD's information systems. It also brought the concept of criminal profiling into the mainstream. Even though good old-fashioned police work checking parking tickets was what ultimately solved the case, David Berkowitz remains incarcerated to this day. Over the decades, he has claimed to have found religion and has expressed remorse for his actions, rebranding himself as the Son of Hope. However, parole boards have consistently denied his release, citing the extreme nature of his crimes and the devastating impact on the victims' families. The justice system has ensured that while he may seek personal redemption, his debt to society can never truly be paid. When we look back at the summer of 1977, we see a city in turmoil and a police force pushed to its limit. We see the tragedy of young lives cut short. Donna Loria, Christine Freund, Virginia Voskerikian, Valentina Suriani, Alexander Esau, and Stacy Moskowitz. We must remember them not as footnotes in a killer's biography, but as people with dreams and futures that were stolen. The resolution of the Son of Sam case reminds us that often the monsters in our midst are captured not by superheroes, but by the mundane errors they make and the diligent, unglamorous work of civil servants. It was a parking ticket, a piece of paper meant to regulate curb space, that stopped a serial killer. As we reflect on this case, it raises a question about the balance between privacy and safety. In 1977, anonymity was easier to maintain. Today, license plate readers and surveillance cameras create a digital dragnet that makes such a spree much harder to execute, but also makes true privacy a rarity. If the Son of Sam were operating today, would digital forensics have caught him after the first attack? Or does the sheer volume of modern data create a new kind of haystack for the needle to hide in? How much of our privacy are we willing to trade for the assurance that the streets are safe at night?